Her sister wore the same perfume to the hotel room that Alma had bought her for Christmas. That's the detail that haunted her most. Not the wine glasses, not Roberto's hand on Antonia's knee, not even the lies that came after. She was 6 weeks pregnant when she walked out of that room. And for 10 years, she made sure Roberto Hotaling never knew his son existed. Until the voicemail. 3 words that cracked open a decade of silence. I need to meet my son. He wasn't supposed to know, but someone had told him. And now Alma had to decide. Protect the life she'd built from nothing, or let the man who destroyed her meet the child she'd raised alone. The first time Alma Farquhar heard Roberto Hotaling's voice again, it wasn't on television, or in a courtroom, or whispered through old memories. It came through a voicemail at 11:34 p.m. on a Tuesday while she was folding laundry in her kitchen. Her hands were deep in a basket of warm towels. James was asleep upstairs, had been for an hour. The house smelled like lavender detergent and the lemon dish soap she'd used after dinner. Outside, the ocean was loud tonight, waves crashing against the rocks a quarter-mile down the hill. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. Alma's thumb hovered over the screen. She got spam calls. Everyone did. Delete. Move on. Finish the laundry. Go to bed. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the time. Who leaves a voicemail at 11:34 p.m.? Maybe it was instinct, the kind that tightens in your stomach before you know why. She pressed play, and the voice that came through made the room tilt. Alma. Thinner than she remembered. Slower. The confidence that used to fill every syllable. Gone. Replaced with something that sounded almost fragile. I don't know if you'll listen to this. I don't deserve that. But I'm asking anyway. A pause. Not dramatic, just hesitant, like he was gathering strength. Please, I need to meet my son. The laundry basket tipped. A sock fell to the floor. Alma didn't pick it up. Son. That word. That single, impossible word, pressed against a decade of silence. Against nights spent rocking James through fevers. Against scraped knees she'd bandaged alone. Against birthday candles she'd blown out with him when he was too small to do it himself. Alma hadn't spoken Roberto Hotaling's name in 10 years. Not since the night she walked into a hotel suite and found him with Antonia, her sister. Laughing like consequences were something that happened to other people. She'd been 6 weeks pregnant. He never knew. And now, somehow, he did. Alma played the voicemail again, then a third time. Not because she wanted to hear his voice. God, she didn't want that. But because she needed to understand what had changed. What she heard in those pauses, in the way his breath caught before the word son, terrified her more than anything he'd actually said. He wasn't angry. He wasn't demanding. He sounded like a man who'd run out of time. Alma set the phone down carefully, like it might shatter. Her kitchen was small but clean, everything in its place. The kind of order you build when chaos used to run your life. Mismatched plates she'd bought at yard sales, a coffee maker that worked most mornings, photos of James taped to the refrigerator, his school picture from last year, the one where he'd refused to smile and somehow looked perfect anyway. She'd spent 10 years becoming someone who didn't need saving, someone who fixed her own leaking sinks and changed her own flat tires, and raised a brilliant, quiet boy who had his father's eyes but none of his recklessness. James, 9 years old, too smart for his own good. The kind of kid who asked questions that made adults uncomfortable because the answers required honesty most people didn't have. He'd asked once, just once, when he was 6, where his father was. Alma had knelt down, looked him in the eyes, and said, "He isn't someone who knew how to love right." That was the truth. Or, at least the part she could live with. James never asked again. Alma walked to the sink, turned on the faucet, let the cold water run over her hands. Outside, the wind picked up, the kind of coastal wind that rattled windows and made you grateful for walls. She'd come to this town because nobody here cared about billionaires. Nobody recognized Roberto Hotaling's name, or knew what his company did, or followed tech industry gossip. She'd worked 2 jobs, morning shift at the diner, afternoon shift cleaning vacation rentals. She'd learned to stretch $1 until it begged for mercy. She'd learned to be alone without being lonely. She'd built this life from nothing. And now, Roberto's voice was in her kitchen, asking for the one thing she'd spent 10 years protecting: her son. Alma dried her hands on a dish towel, walked to the stairs, stopped at the bottom, one hand on the railing. Upstairs, James's door was cracked open. The nightlight she'd plugged in when he was 3 still glowed. He claimed he didn't need it anymore, but she hadn't unplugged it, and neither had he. She could hear his breathing, steady, safe. He had Roberto's eyes, the same shade of gray-blue that used to make her forget to breathe when Roberto looked at her. James had gotten her nose, her stubbornness, her quiet strength. But those eyes? Those were his father's. She whispered into the darkness, "What do I tell you?" The question hung there, unanswered, because the truth was complicated. The truth had sharp edges. The truth was that she'd loved Roberto Hotaling so completely, she'd ignored every red flag. She'd been the woman who stayed late at the office to bring him dinner during board meetings, who learned to read his moods by the way he loosened his tie, who believed him when he said she was the only one who truly understood him. She'd been 6 weeks pregnant when her world collapsed. Alma turned away from the stairs, walked back to the kitchen. The voicemail was still there on her phone, waiting. Like it had been waiting for 10 years to arrive. How did he find out? She'd been so careful. Changed her last name back to her maiden name, Farquhar. Moved to a town 6 hours from the city. Paid for everything in cash for the first 2 years. No social media, no digital footprints, no connections to her old life, except Lydia, her best friend, and Lydia would never betray her. So how? The question circled like a shark. And underneath it, another question. Quieter, more dangerous. What if James deserves to know? Alma shook her head. No. She'd made the right choice. She'd protected her son from a man who didn't know how to be present, who built empires but couldn't build a relationship, who'd let her sister, her own sister. She stopped that thought before it could finish. 10 years ago, she'd made a promise to herself, standing in a gas station bathroom, holding a positive pregnancy test. This child will never doubt he's loved. This child will never wonder if he's enough. This child will never be collateral damage in someone else's chaos. She'd kept that promise. But now Roberto knew, and he was asking. Not demanding, asking. That's what scared her most. The Roberto she'd known didn't ask. He negotiated. He strategized. He won. This man on the voicemail sounded like someone who'd lost. Alma picked up her phone one more time, stared at the unknown number. Her finger hovered over the callback button. She didn't press it. Instead, she saved the voicemail, locked her phone, turned off the kitchen light. Tomorrow, she'd figure out what to do. Tomorrow, when James was at school, and she had 8 hours to think without those gray-blue eyes watching her, wondering why she looked so shaken. Tomorrow. But as she climbed the stairs and passed James's room and slipped into her own bed in the darkness, one thought followed her. Roberto Hotaling didn't just know about James. He knew James was his, which meant someone had told him, someone who'd seen them together, Someone who'd recognize those unmistakable eyes and put the pieces together. And if someone knew, that meant the life she'd built, the safe, small, anonymous life, had a crack in it. Alma closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come. Because 10 years ago, she'd walked away from Roberto Hotaling with her dignity intact and her secrets protected. But she hadn't always been this strong. The woman she used to be, that woman would have stayed, would have forgiven, would have believed his excuses. The woman she'd become? She'd walked out of that hotel room without a single word and never looked back. Until now. Because now there was James. And James changed everything. She didn't know it yet, but in 2 days, a letter would arrive. Handwritten, shaky penmanship, that told a story of its own. She didn't know that the betrayal she'd witnessed in that hotel suite wasn't what she thought. She didn't know that Antonia had been playing a game far more dangerous than simple seduction. And she didn't know that Roberto Hotaling, the man who once ran marathons and closed billion-dollar deals and never showed weakness, now sat in a wheelchair, learning to move his fingers again. All she knew was that his voice had found her, and the past she'd buried was clawing its way back to the surface. But before she could decide what to do about Roberto, she'd have to remember the night that destroyed everything. And some memories don't fade. They wait, quiet, patient, ready to cut you open all over again. 10 years ago, Alma had been someone else. She'd been the woman who loved Roberto Hotaling so completely. She ignored every red flag. The woman who believed working late meant working. Who thought her sister's sudden interest in Roberto's business was supportive, not suspicious. She'd been 6 weeks pregnant, and she'd been about to walk into the worst 30 seconds of her life. The feeling started in the Uber. 10:47 p.m., Thursday night. Alma's stomach twisted. Not morning sickness, something darker, instinct, the kind that crawls up your spine when your body knows something your brain hasn't accepted yet. Roberto had texted 2 hours earlier. Board meeting running long. Don't wait up. But his location, the one they'd shared months ago during a romantic let's always know where the other is phase, showed the Grandview Hotel. Not the office. The Grandview. Alma had stared at that blue dot on her phone for 20 minutes before calling the Uber. Told herself she was being paranoid. Told herself there was an explanation. Told herself she was the crazy girlfriend who couldn't trust. But she got in the car anyway. Now, crossing the bridge into downtown, watching the city lights blur through rain-streaked windows, she pressed one hand against her still flat stomach. The pregnancy test was hidden in her bathroom drawer at home. She'd taken it that morning, hadn't told Roberto yet, was waiting for the right moment. There is no right moment anymore, a voice whispered. She told it to shut up. The Grandview lobby smelled like lilies and money. White marble floors, crystal chandeliers. The kind of hotel where rooms started at $600 a night, and discretion was included in the price. Alma's heels clicked too loud as she crossed to the elevators. The front desk clerk glanced up, smiled professionally, went back to his computer. He didn't stop her. Why would he? She looked like she belonged. Designer dress, confident stride, the kind of woman who had every right to be there. She didn't feel like that woman. She felt like someone walking toward a car accident she could already see happening. The elevator hummed. 14th floor. Roberto's location had been specific, Suite 1408. Her heart didn't beat faster. It went quiet. That terrified her more. Suite 1408. The door was cracked open, just enough, just a sliver of golden light spilling into the hallway. Alma's hand stopped inches from knocking. Because she heard laughter. His laugh, deep, unguarded. The one he saved for moments when he felt safe. Then another voice, lighter, familiar in a way that made her blood freeze. "You're terrible," the voice said, playful. "You love it," Roberto replied. Alma's hand moved without permission, pushed the door open. The suite opened into a living room. Soft lighting, expensive furniture, a bottle of wine on the coffee table, half empty. Roberto sat on the cream-colored couch, and next to him, too close, thigh pressed against his, was Antonia, her sister. Roberto's hand rested on Antonia's knee, casual, comfortable, like it had been there before, like it belonged there. 2 wine glasses, both used. Antonia's lipstick stained the rim of hers, deep red, the color she always wore when she wanted attention. They didn't see Alma immediately. She watched. 5 seconds that lasted forever. Antonia said something Alma couldn't hear. Roberto laughed again, leaned closer. Then Antonia's eyes flicked toward the door. She saw Alma, and she smiled. Not guilty, not embarrassed. She smiled like she'd won something. Oh, Alma. Roberto's head snapped up. For 1 second, just one, his face showed everything. Shock, guilt, fear. Then it closed, smoothed over, became the face he used in boardrooms when someone challenged him. He didn't stand, didn't move his hand from Antonia's knee. He said, "This isn't what it looks like." 4 words, the most insulting 4 words in the English language. Antonia set her wine glass down on the coffee table, carefully, deliberately, like she had all the time in the world. "We were just talking," she added, her voice honey-sweet. The lie was worse than the act. They thought she was stupid, thought she'd believe them, thought she'd make a scene they could manage, could spin, could explain away later. Alma looked at Roberto, then at Antonia, then back at the hand still resting on her sister's knee. She felt something crack inside her chest. Not her heart. That would come later. This was something deeper. The foundation she'd built her entire life on. The belief that people you loved wouldn't destroy you. Alma didn't scream, didn't throw the wine bottle, didn't cry, didn't give them the satisfaction of her pain. She said 4 words of her own. "I'm done with both of you." Her voice didn't shake, didn't rise. It was calm, final. The voice of someone who'd already made every decision that mattered. Then she turned around and walked out. Didn't run. Walked, 1 foot in front of the other, past the expensive furniture and the incriminating wine glasses and the sister who'd betrayed her and the man she'd loved completely. Behind her, she heard Roberto say her name. Once. "Alma." She didn't stop, didn't look back. The door closed behind her with a soft click. The elevator was empty. Alma stepped inside, pressed L for lobby, watched the doors slide shut. That's when her hands started shaking. That's when the sob rose in her throat, raw, animal, unstoppable. That's when she shattered. She pressed her back against the elevator wall, covered her mouth with both hands, and let herself break where no one could see. 14 floors, 45 seconds. By the time the doors opened, her face was dry. Her hands were steady. She walked through the lobby like a woman who had somewhere important to be. The Uber driver didn't ask questions. Home, their apartment, the one she'd decorated, the one where she'd imagined raising a family. Alma moved methodically. Suitcase from the closet, her clothes, her books, her laptop. Nothing he'd given her, nothing that would tie her to him. She worked in silence, no music, no tears, just the sound of drawers opening and closing and zippers sliding shut. In the bathroom, she found the pregnancy test where she'd hidden it that morning. 2 pink lines staring back at her. She stood there holding it, one hand pressed against her stomach, and made the decision that would define the next decade. He'll never know. This child deserves better. Not better than him. Better than this. Better than broken promises and hotel rooms and sisters who smiled while they betrayed you. You know, there are moments that define us. Moments when we choose who we're going to be. Alma chose herself that night. And if you've ever had to make that choice, if you've ever walked away from someone who didn't deserve you, I see you. We all do, here. This community, we're building something. Stories about women who refuse to be broken. So if this story is hitting you somewhere deep, subscribe. Because there are more like Alma, and they all deserve to be heard. She left before sunrise, took only what fit in her car, drove 6 hours to a coastal town she'd visited once as a child. Started over. She didn't leave because she stopped loving him. She left because she loved herself more. And that terrified her because she'd never done that before. Present day. Alma sat on James's bedroom floor, back against his bed, the memory still sharp enough to cut. That was the last time she'd seen Roberto. Until the voicemail. 10 years of silence, 10 years of safety, 10 years of building a life where betrayal couldn't touch her. But now he knew about James. How? She'd been so careful. Changed her name. Moved. Disappeared completely. Unless someone had seen them. Unless someone had recognized those unmistakable gray-blue eyes and connected the dots. Unless the past she'd buried wasn't as dead as she'd thought. Alma stood, walked to her bedroom window, looked out at the dark ocean. Tomorrow she'd have to decide. Answer or ignore. Protect or expose. Keep the life she'd built or crack it open for the truth. But tonight, she let herself remember. The hotel room. The betrayal. The moment she became someone new. Because what she didn't know yet, what would change everything, was that the night in that hotel wasn't what it seemed. That Antonia had been playing a game far more dangerous than seduction. That Roberto had been trying to catch a spy, not cheat on the woman he loved. But she didn't know that yet. All she knew was that his voice had found her after 10 years of silence. And the question that kept her awake wasn't whether she could forgive him. It was whether James deserved to meet the father who never knew he existed. Morning came too soon. James padded downstairs at 7:15 a.m. wearing mismatched socks and his favorite dinosaur shirt, the one Alma kept saying was getting too small but couldn't bring herself to throw away. His hair stuck up on one side. He had Roberto's eyes, but Alma's morning face. Slightly grumpy until the second cup of orange juice. He stopped at the kitchen doorway, studying her. "Mom, are you okay?" Alma looked up from her coffee. She'd been staring at it for 20 minutes without drinking. The mug had gone cold in her hands. "I'm fine, honey." The lie tasted bitter. James tilted his head, unconvinced. He had a way of looking at her that made her feel transparent, like he could see straight through. To the sleepless night and the voicemail she'd replayed 17 times in the dark. "You sure?" "I'm sure. Eat your cereal. Bus comes in 15 minutes. He poured his Cheerios, added too much milk like always, and ate in comfortable silence. Alma watched him, memorized him, the way his fingers drummed on the table between bites. The concentration on his face when he read the back of the cereal box. The cowlick that refused to stay flat no matter how much she smoothed it down. He was hers. She'd built him from nothing, from sleepless nights and scraped together grocery money, and a fierce determination that he'd never feel unwanted. But he was also Roberto's, and she couldn't unsee that anymore. The school bus honked outside at 7:42. James grabbed his backpack, kissed her cheek, and ran out the door yelling goodbye. The house fell silent except for the kitchen clock ticking and the distant sound of waves. Alma sat at her small kitchen table with her laptop. She'd sworn she'd never do this, never look him up, never check on him, never give him even a second of her attention. But her fingers moved anyway. She typed, Roberto Hotaling, the first result loaded, and her breath caught. Tech mogul Roberto Hotaling survives catastrophic helicopter crash. The headline was 2 years old. Below it, a photo that made something twist in her chest. Roberto, in a hospital bed. Thinner, so much thinner than she remembered. Scarred, his face gaunt, shadows under his eyes. Medical equipment surrounding him. But it was his hands that stopped her. They rested on top of the white sheets, fingers curled awkwardly, trembling even in the still photograph. She clicked the article. Billionaire CEO Roberto Hotaling, 42, survived a catastrophic helicopter malfunction during a business trip to Denver. The crash resulted in severe spinal trauma, leaving Hotaling with partial paralysis from the waist down and limited mobility in his hands. He spent 9 months in intensive rehabilitation at the Kessler Institute. 9 months. She scrolled further. In a rare interview from his hospital room, Hotaling spoke candidly about his recovery. Wealth means nothing when you can't move your hands to hold what matters. I built an empire, but I never built anything that could survive this, and that's on me. Alma read that quote 3 times. The Roberto she'd known would never have said that. Would never have admitted weakness. Would never have let anyone see him broken. She should feel nothing. She wanted to feel nothing. She'd spent 10 years building walls, specifically designed to keep him out, to keep herself safe from the memory of what he'd done. But staring at that photograph, at his trembling hands and hollow eyes, she felt something worse than anger. Pity. She hated that. Pity meant the door wasn't completely closed, and she'd spent 10 years keeping it locked. That your Roberto? Alma jumped, nearly knocking over her cold coffee. Margie stood in the doorway. Her neighbor, 68, wearing her gardening gloves and that knowing expression she got when she saw through Alma's carefully constructed privacy. Margie, I didn't hear you knock. Door was open. Saw you through the screen, looking like someone died. Margie moved closer, peering at the laptop screen over Alma's shoulder. Lord have mercy. That's him, isn't it? The one you don't talk about. He was never mine, Alma said automatically. Margie pulled out a chair, sat down uninvited, the way only a woman who'd lived through 3 husbands and raised 5 children could. She looked at the photo, then at Alma, then back at the photo. Suffering changes people, honey, Margie said softly. Doesn't erase what they did, but it changes them. You don't know what he did. Don't have to. I know what you look like when you talk about him. Or don't talk about him, more accurately. Margie reached over, closed the laptop gently. Question is, what are you going to do about it? Before Alma could answer, before she could even process the question, the doorbell rang. FedEx. The delivery driver handed her a thick envelope, got her signature, and left. The return address made her hands shake. Roberto Hotaling, Kessler Rehabilitation Center. Margie stood. I'll let you handle that alone. But honey, whatever's in there, you don't owe him anything. Remember that. The door closed softly behind her. Alma stood in her small living room holding the envelope. The handwriting on the address label was shaky. Roberto's penmanship, but altered, uncertain. The disability showed even in the way he'd written her name. She sat on her worn couch and opened it. Inside, 3 pages. Handwritten on expensive stationery. The same trembling script. She began to read, and Roberto's voice filled her head as clearly as if he were sitting beside her. Alma, I don't deserve a response. I know that. But I'm asking anyway. Because I've learned that pride dies when your body does. I know about James. I've known for 3 years. A mutual friend. Someone from the old office. Saw you both at a park in Seabrook. She sent me a photo without thinking. Just, look who I ran into. I saw his eyes. There's no mistaking those eyes. Alma's breath came shallow. 3 years. He'd known for 3 years and never reached out. I didn't contact you immediately because I thought I had time. Thought I could get better, get stronger, become someone worthy of asking. But the doctors gave me news last month that changed that timeline. The spinal damage is progressing. I have maybe 5 years of mobility left, maybe less. I'm not asking to be his father. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for one afternoon, to meet him, to tell him I'm sorry I didn't exist. And then I'll disappear again, if that's what you need. I'm dying, Alma. Not today, not tomorrow, but the damage is progressing, and I'd like to not spend what time I have left wondering what he sounds like. What makes him laugh? If he's curious like you, or stubborn like me, if he knows he's loved. I have no rights here, no claim. Just a request from a man who lost everything except the capacity to regret. Roberto Alma read the letter 3 times. Each time, different details caught her. The way his handwriting deteriorated toward the end, like his hands had gotten tired. The ink smudge where he'd clearly paused, maybe cried. The complete absence of excuses or explanations for what happened 10 years ago. She picked up her phone, called Lydia. Her best friend answered on the first ring. Please tell me you're calling to cancel lunch because you won a lottery ticket. He wrote me a letter. Silence. Then, Roberto? He knows about James. Has for 3 years. And he's dying, Lydia. Helicopter crash, paralysis, progressive spinal damage. More silence. Lydia had been there the night Alma showed up with the suitcase and red eyes. Had helped her find this apartment. Had babysat James through every illness and late work shift. Had earned the right to have an opinion. What do you want to do? Lydia asked carefully. I don't know. I spent 10 years protecting James from this exact situation. From instability. From a father who'd disappoint him. What does James deserve to know? That question broke something open in Alma's chest. Because she'd been asking the wrong question. She'd been asking what she could handle, what she could control, what would keep her safe, not what her son deserved. I don't know, Alma whispered. Then figure it out. Not what you're scared of. What James deserves. They talked for another 20 minutes. Lydia didn't tell her what to do. She never did. She just listened while Alma worked through the maze of her own fear. After they hung up, Alma sat with the letter in her lap. She didn't respond immediately. She needed to know more. About the accident, about how he'd really found out. About why, after 10 years of silence, Roberto Hotaling suddenly wanted to be a father. But deeper than that, she needed to know something about Antonia. Something had been nagging at her since reading about the crash. A detail she couldn't quite place. A suspicion that the night in that hotel room wasn't the whole story. She opened her laptop again, started searching. What she'd discover about Antonia would change everything. But she didn't know that yet. For now, she opened her email. Stared at the blank message. Typed, Roberto, I need time to think about this. Deleted it. Typed, this is complicated. James doesn't know you exist. Deleted it. Typed, how dare you ask me for anything after what you did. Deleted it. Finally, she typed 3 words. 1 meeting. Supervised. Her finger hovered over send. She thought she was protecting James, making the safe choice, controlling the situation. She didn't realize she was protecting herself too. From the possibility that Roberto had changed. From the possibility that the story she'd lived with for 10 years wasn't complete. From the possibility that forgiveness didn't mean weakness. She pressed send. The email whooshed away. And just like that, the door she'd spent a decade keeping locked creaked open just wide enough for truth to slip through. Outside, the ocean roared. Inside, Alma sat in the silence of her small living room, holding a letter from a man who'd destroyed her, and wondering if the worst mistake of her life was the one she'd just made, or the one she'd made 10 years ago when she walked away without asking questions. 2 weeks later, Alma sat in a rental car outside Kessler Rehabilitation Center, gripping the steering wheel like it might save her. The building loomed ahead, modern glass and steel trying to look less like a hospital and more like hope. It failed. Medical facilities always smelled the same, looked the same, felt the same. No amount of architecture could hide what happened inside. People learning to live in bodies that had betrayed them. In the passenger seat, James sat quietly, staring at the entrance. He'd worn his good jeans, the ones without grass stains, and the button-up shirt Alma had bought him for school pictures. He'd combed his hair without being asked. He was nervous. So was she. "Is he nice?" James asked, voice small. Alma turned to look at her son. Really look at him. 9 years old. Too young for this. Too old to be lied to. She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He used to be." James nodded slowly, processing. Then he did something that broke her heart and rebuilt it in the same breath. He noticed the way her jaw tightened, the way her fingers hadn't left the steering wheel, the way she kept glancing at the entrance like it might swallow them both. "Mom, we can leave if you want." That's when Alma knew her son was braver than she was. "No," she said, releasing the steering wheel, forcing her hands to relax. "We're here. Let's do this." They walked across the parking lot together. Alma's hand found James's, squeezed once. He squeezed back. Inside, the receptionist directed them to the courtyard garden. "Mr. Hautaling is waiting for you." The sliding glass doors opened into a carefully manicured space that tried hard to feel like anything but a hospital. Rose bushes bloomed along stone pathways. Wooden benches sat beneath shade trees. A fountain burbled in the center, water cascading over smooth river rocks. Medical equipment hid behind strategic landscaping, but Alma could still see it. The wheelchair ramps, the handrails, the emergency call buttons disguised as garden posts. And there, beside the fountain, sat Roberto Hautaling. He was looking at the water, his profile sharp against the afternoon sun. Thinner than in the photographs. His wheelchair was sleek, expensive, the kind designed to look less medical and more lifestyle. He wore jeans and a simple gray sweater. His hands rested in his lap, trembling slightly even at rest. When he heard their footsteps on the stone path, he turned, slowly, like the movement cost him something. His hands gripped the armrests to steady himself. And then Roberto and James locked eyes. It was undeniable. The resemblance, the same gray-blue eyes, the same slight tilt to the head when curious, the same serious expression that made them both look older than they were. Roberto's face crumpled, just for a second. A flash of raw emotion, grief, wonder, regret, all compressed into one unguarded moment. Then he steadied himself, pulled it back, became composed again. "Hi, James," he said. His voice was softer than Alma remembered, gentler. "Hi," James replied. Silence fell. Awkward, human. The kind of silence that happens when two people have everything and nothing to say to each other. Roberto tried to smile, failed, started again. I don't really know what to say. I practiced, but now it feels fake." James tilted his head, studying this man who was supposed to be his father. "That's okay. I didn't practice either." Something in Roberto's expression softened. Relief, maybe, or gratitude. Alma stood back, far enough to give them space, close enough to intervene if James needed her. She positioned herself near a bench, arms crossed, watching. She watched Roberto struggle to wheel himself closer to James. The chair caught on an uneven stone. His hands shook as he adjusted. It took 3 tries. She watched James notice. Watched her son's face shift from guardedness to something else. Compassion. That terrified her more than anything. Compassion. James had inherited that from her. The ability to see suffering and respond with kindness rather than judgment. It was beautiful. It was dangerous. "You can sit if you want," Roberto said, gesturing to a nearby bench. James sat. Roberto wheeled himself to face him, maintaining careful distance. "I wasn't there when you needed me," Roberto said. "No preamble, no warm-up, just truth. That's on me, not your mom, not anyone else. Me." James sat very still. "Why?" The question every child asks, the one that deserves a real answer. Roberto didn't look away, didn't deflect. "Because I was selfish and stupid, and I thought I had time to figure things out. Then time ran out. Mom says you didn't know about me. I didn't, but that's not an excuse. I should have been someone your mother could tell, someone she trusted. I wasn't." Roberto's hands trembled harder. He pressed them against his thighs. "I built a whole company, made millions of dollars, won awards, and none of it matters because I wasn't there for the one thing that actually counted." James absorbed this. His face was serious, thoughtful. "Does it hurt?" he asked suddenly. Roberto blinked, surprised. "The wheelchair?" James nodded. Roberto considered lying. Alma could see it in his face. The instinct to minimize, to protect the child from uncomfortable truth. But he chose honesty. "Every day," he said quietly, "but not as much as knowing I missed 9 years of you." The words hung in the garden air. A confession. An apology. A truth so raw, it made Alma's throat tighten. James looked at his hands, then at Roberto's trembling ones, then back at his face. "What was I like?" James asked. "As a baby?" Roberto's face crumpled again. "I don't know. I wasn't there." "Oh, but I'd like to know what you're like now, if you'd let me." James glanced back at Alma. She gave him a small nod. "Your choice." "What do you want to know?" James asked. And just like that, the conversation opened. Small questions at first. Favorite color? Favorite subject in school? Whether he liked sports or books or both. Roberto asked. James answered. Sometimes Roberto shared something about himself in return. Alma watched her son, and the man who destroyed her, sit in a rehabilitation garden and build something fragile and new. A bridge made of small truths. You know what's remarkable about children? They see people, not mistakes. They offer what we're too scared to give, a second look. And if you're watching this, thinking about your own second chances, the ones you gave, or the ones you're still deciding on, you're not alone. That's what we talk about here. Real life, real choices. Messy and beautiful and complicated. So if you're finding something real here, hit that like button. It tells me you want more stories like this. And trust me, I've got them. 30 minutes passed, then 45. The afternoon sun shifted, casting long shadows across the garden. Finally, James stood. Roberto looked up at him, trying to hide the disappointment that their time was ending. James extended his hand. Roberto stared at it for a moment, then took it. His hand shook in James's smaller, steadier one. I'll think about it, James said seriously. Think about what? Roberto asked. Whether I want to see you again? Roberto nodded. That's fair. That's more than fair. They shook hands like businessmen, like equals. Alma's heart broke and healed at once. As they walked back toward the sliding glass doors, James looked back once. Roberto had turned his wheelchair toward the fountain again, but his shoulders shook in a way that had nothing to do with his injury. In the car, James was quiet for the first 5 minutes. Then, "He's different than I thought." "How so?" "Sadder, but—" James struggled for the word. "Real." Alma drove them home through the late afternoon traffic, her mind replaying every moment of the meeting. The way Roberto hadn't made excuses, the way James had offered his hand, the way something impossible had become possible in a hospital garden. She thought that was the hardest part. The meeting, the introduction, the first step into unknown territory. She was wrong. Because 2 days later, while James was at school and Alma was finishing her shift at the diner, her phone rang. Unknown number. "Alma Farquhar." "Yes." "This is Kendra Liu. I used to work for Roberto Hotaling. I saw you at the hospital last week. I need to talk to you about something, about Antonia, about what really happened that night." And what Kendra said would shatter everything Alma thought she knew. The call came 3 days after the garden meeting, while Alma was wiping down tables at the diner during the afternoon lull. Unknown number. She almost sent it to voicemail. Had her thumb hovering over the decline button when something made her answer. "Alma Farquhar?" "Yes." "This is Kendra Liu. I used to work for Roberto Hotaling." Alma's hand stopped mid-wipe. The diner suddenly felt too small, too loud. The coffee machine hissed. Someone's fork clinked against a plate. Normal sounds in an abnormal moment. "I saw you at the hospital last week," Kendra continued. "With your son. I need to tell you something. About Antonia. About what really happened that night." Alma's stomach dropped. "How did you get my number?" "Roberto. But he doesn't know I'm calling. This is me. Just me." Kendra's voice was steady, professional. "Can we meet? Somewhere neutral. There are things you need to know." They met at a coffee shop 2 towns over, far enough from Alma's routine that she wouldn't run into anyone she knew. Kendra was already there when Alma arrived. Mid-40s, sharp blazer, intelligent eyes that had clearly seen more than they wanted to. A thick manila folder sat on the table in front of her. "Thank you for coming," Kendra said as Alma sat down. "I'm not sure why I did." "Because you deserve the truth." Kendra pushed the folder across the table. "Everything in here is documented, verified, legal." Alma didn't open it. "What is it?" Kendra took a breath. Antonia wasn't just sleeping with Roberto. She was working for his competitors. Industrial espionage. The coffee shop noise faded to white static. "What?" Kendra opened the folder, revealing printed emails, bank statements, legal documents. Her finger traced the dates. "For 8 months, your sister fed proprietary information to Orion Capital, Roberto's biggest rival at the time. Trade secrets, client lists, merger, strategies, everything." Alma stared at the documents. Antonia's name appeared again and again. Payments, wire transfers, coded emails that weren't coded well enough. "The affair wasn't coincidence," Kendra continued. "It was strategic. She needed access. Needed to get close enough to his personal devices, his home office, his unguarded conversations. The seduction was her weapon." Alma's coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. She set it down carefully, afraid her shaking hands would spill it. "When did Roberto find out?" "The day before you walked into that hotel room." The world tilted. "He'd been suspicious for weeks," Kendra said. "Data leaks that shouldn't have happened. Information his competitors knew before his own board did. He hired a forensic IT team. They traced it back to Antonia." Alma's mind raced backward, replaying that night. The hotel suite, the wine glasses, Roberto's hand on Antonia's knee. So when I walked in, he was trying to get her to confess on recording for legal protection. Kendra pulled out another document. This is the non-disclosure agreement she signed 2 days later. Roberto paid her $2 million to go away quietly, to not destroy his reputation publicly while he was already hemorrhaging money from her betrayal. $2 million. Alma felt sick. She took the money and disappeared, Kendra said. Last I heard, she was in Monaco, living very well. Wait, Alma's voice came out sharp. He knew? He knew what she was doing that night? He'd just found out that afternoon. He was trying to contain the damage. But he didn't tell me. When I walked in, when I saw them together, he could have explained. Kendra's expression softened with something like pity. He tried to call you 17 times that night. Came to your apartment the next day. You were gone. Alma remembered. She'd blocked his number in the elevator. Had packed and left before sunrise. Had run so fast and so far he'd never caught up. And when you didn't answer, when you disappeared completely, he thought you didn't want to hear it, that you were done. And honestly, Kendra leaned back. He thought you were right to be done. He'd let your sister, a corporate spy, get close enough to destroy everything. That was on him. The night that destroyed her life wasn't what she thought. Roberto hadn't been cheating. He'd been investigating. Antonia hadn't been a sister who betrayed her for a man. She'd been a mercenary who used them both. But that doesn't erase the betrayal. It just complicates it. Alma didn't know how to feel. Vindicated, angrier, relieved. All three crashed together until she felt nothing but exhausted. Why didn't he tell me this before? Alma asked. In the letter, in the voicemail. Why not explain? Because it sounds like an excuse. Because 10 years is a long time to carry a story no one will believe. Because, Kendra hesitated, because he thinks he deserved to lose you. Not for the affair that didn't happen, but for being the kind of man whose life was so focused on business that he didn't see a spy sitting on his couch. Alma sat back, processing. He looked for you, Kendra said quietly. For 2 years. Hired investigators, checked hospitals, social media, mutual friends. But you'd vanished. Changed your name. No trail. I was protecting myself. I know, and he understood that. Eventually, he stopped looking. Thought you'd moved on. Built a new life. He tried to do the same. Until he found out about James. Kendra nodded. 3 years ago, a woman from the old office, Michelle Chen, remember her, saw you at a park in Seabrook, took a photo, sent it to Roberto, just making conversation, not thinking. She paused. When he saw James's face, he broke down. How do you know? Because Michelle called me crying, said she'd never seen him like that, said he'd asked her to delete the photo and never mention you again. But it was too late. He knew. Alma pressed her hands, flat on the table, steadying herself. Why are you telling me this? Kendra met her eyes. Because I watched that man lose everything. His health, his reputation, his company nearly tanked from Antonia's leaks. And through all of it, the only time I saw him actually cry was when he saw a photo of your son. Silence stretched between them. I'm not saying you owe him anything, Kendra continued. I'm saying the story was never what you thought. And James deserves parents who know the truth. Whatever you do with it, that's up to you. She stood, leaving the folder on the table. He's a good man who made mistakes, and he's paying for them in ways most people never have to. Kendra adjusted her purse. But he's trying, in the only way he knows how. After Kendra left, Alma sat alone in the coffee shop for an hour. The folder sat in front of her. Evidence of a betrayal that wasn't what it seemed. Of a sister who'd weaponized intimacy. Of a man who'd been trying to protect his company and lost everything anyway. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't hating someone. It's realizing they were human all along. Flawed, scared, trying. And if you've ever had to rewrite your story about someone, if you've ever had to hold two truths at once, you know how lonely that feels. But you're not alone here. Share this story, because someone in your life needs to hear it. Someone who's carrying a story that's more complicated than they can say out loud. Alma drove home in silence as the sun set over the coastal highway. James was at a friend's house for dinner. She had the evening alone, in her quiet living room, surrounded by the life she'd built from nothing. Alma pulled out her phone. Roberto's contact was still there, still saved. She'd never deleted it. For 10 years, it had sat in her phone like a ghost. She typed, "We need to talk. About Antonia. About everything." Her finger hovered over send. She thought this conversation would bring closure. A final chapter. An ending that made sense. She didn't know it would crack her open in ways she'd spent 10 years avoiding. Didn't know it would force her to ask questions she'd buried. What if I'd stayed? What if I'd listened? What if the story I've been telling myself was incomplete? She pressed send. And somewhere in a rehabilitation center, Roberto Hotaling's phone buzzed with a message he'd been waiting a decade to receive. They met at the hospital garden again. Evening this time, when the rehabilitation staff had gone home and the only sounds were the fountain and distant traffic. Roberto was there early, positioned by the same bench where he'd first met James. His hands were folded in his lap, fingers trembling slightly. He looked up when he heard Alma's footsteps on the stone path, and the expression on his face was pure anxiety. She'd left James with Margie. This conversation needed to happen without her son watching. Alma sat on the bench, not close, but not across the garden either. Close enough to talk, without shouting. Far enough to maintain the distance she'd spent 10 years building. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Alma said, "Kendra told me about Antonia." Roberto closed his eyes, a long, slow blink that looked like pain. "I should have told you myself. You should have told me then." "I know." The two words hung between them, not an excuse, just acknowledgement. Roberto opened his eyes, looked at the fountain instead of at her. "I discovered what Antonia was doing the afternoon before you found us. My IT team had been tracking the leaks for weeks. When they traced it back to her, I couldn't believe it." His hands gripped the wheelchair armrests. "I thought if I could get her to confess on recording, I could use it for legal protection, minimize the damage to the company. So I agreed to meet her at the hotel, brought my phone to record." He laughed bitterly. "But I failed. She was better at manipulation than I was at detecting it." Alma stared at him. "You let me think you betrayed me." "I did betray you." Roberto turned to face her finally, and his eyes were red-rimmed. "By not being someone you could trust enough to come to. By building a life where secrets were normal. By prioritizing business over you." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "Antonia was the symptom, Alma. I was the disease." The honesty hit harder than anger would have. "When you disappeared," Roberto continued, "I tried to find you. Called everyone we knew. Drove to your sister's place. She was already gone, too. Checked hospitals. I thought..." He stopped, swallowed. "I thought maybe you'd hurt yourself. Because of what you'd seen." Alma's jaw tightened. "I was stronger than that. I know that now. But then I just knew I'd destroyed the only real thing in my life, and I didn't know how to fix it." "So you just stopped looking?" "After 2 years, yes, I thought you'd moved on. Built something better." "I hoped you had." Roberto's voice cracked. "And then 3 years ago, I saw a photo of you with a boy who had my eyes, and I realized you had built something better, just without me." Alma stood, walked to the fountain. The water caught the fading light, turned golden and orange. "Do you know what it's like to raise a child alone?" she asked, her back to him. "To answer, 'Where's Daddy?' with lies? To work 2 jobs and still barely make rent? To fix everything that breaks because there's no one else to call? No, Roberto said quietly. But I know what it's like to realize you'll die never knowing your son's favorite color, or what he sounds like when he laughs. His voice broke. The sound of it, raw, unguarded, made Alma turn around. Roberto was crying, not dramatically, just tears sliding down his face while he sat motionless in his wheelchair, hands shaking in his lap. And I deserve that, he continued, but he doesn't. That's when it crystallized for Alma. This isn't about Roberto. This is about James. Her son deserved the truth, all of it, even the complicated parts, even the parts that didn't fit into neat categories of right and wrong. She sat back down on the bench. You can see him, she said, regularly, but slowly. And if he says stop, we stop. Roberto exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. Thank you. I'm not doing this for you. I know. They sat in silence for a moment. The fountain burbled. Somewhere in the building behind them, a door closed. How often? Roberto asked. Once a week to start, supervised. Here, or somewhere neutral. Whatever you think is best. And you tell him the truth. When he asks questions, and he will, you tell him the truth. Not sanitized, not spun. The truth. I can do that. Alma nodded. He's a good kid, Roberto. He's kind. He's smart. He asks hard questions. He's like you, then. He's like both of us. That's what terrifies me. Roberto almost smiled. Almost. For what it's worth, you did an incredible job. I saw it in the garden. The way he thinks, the way he speaks. That's all you. Don't, Alma said sharply. Don't what? Don't try to make this moment something it isn't. This isn't forgiveness. This isn't reconciliation. This is me doing what's right for my son. I understand. Alma stood to leave. She'd said what she needed to say, made the arrangement, set the boundaries. There was nothing left to do here. But as she walked toward the exit, Roberto's voice stopped her. Alma? She paused, but didn't turn around. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to fight for you. The accident didn't change me. It just made me honest about who I'd always been. A coward. Alma stood very still. The word hung in the air between them. Then, without turning around, she said, You're not a coward, Roberto. Cowards don't admit they're wrong. She walked away before he could respond. That night, after James came home from Margie's house, full of stories about the cookies they'd baked, Alma sat him down on the couch. I need to tell you something, she said. About your father. About what happened 10 years ago. James set down his book, gave her his full attention. And Alma told him everything. The hotel room. The betrayal that wasn't what it seemed. Antonia's espionage. The money. The accident. The years of silence. She didn't sanitize it. Didn't protect him from the complicated truth. James listened without interrupting. Asked clarifying questions. Processed it with the same serious intelligence he applied to everything. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then, Can I keep seeing him? Alma had expected the question, had prepared for it. If you want to. I think I do, James said slowly. He seems sad, but like, trying not to be? I don't know how to explain it. I know what you mean. Are you mad at him? Alma considered the question, really considered it. I was, for a long time. Now, I'm just tired. That makes sense. James picked at a thread on the couch cushion. Do you think he's telling the truth? About Aunt Antonia? Yes. Where is she now? Monaco. Far away from here. James nodded. Good. I don't want to meet her. You won't have to. I promise. They sat together for a while in comfortable silence. Then James leaned against her shoulder the way he used to when he was smaller. Thanks for telling me the truth, he said. You deserved it. I know. But still, thanks. Alma kissed the top of his head, breathed in the smell of cookies and shampoo, and the particular scent that was uniquely her son. She thought the hard part was over. The meeting, the truth, the arrangement. She was wrong. Because 4 months later, on a Tuesday afternoon while James was at school, and Alma was restocking napkins at the diner, her phone rang. Kessler Rehabilitation Center. Ms. Farquhar, this is Dr. Martinez. Roberto Hotoling collapsed during physical therapy. He's stable, but he's asking for James. How soon can you get here? And the call that came next would test everything they'd built. 6 months had passed since the garden conversation. 6 months of careful Tuesdays and Thursdays when Roberto met James in the Rehabilitation Center courtyard. 6 months of slow trust building. 6 months of normalcy. Then the phone rang. Alma was at the diner, refilling the ketchup bottles during the late afternoon lull, when her phone vibrated across the counter. Kessler Rehabilitation Center. Her stomach dropped before she even answered. Ms. Farquhar, this is Dr. Martinez. Roberto Hotoling collapsed during physical therapy about 40 minutes ago. The ketchup bottle slipped from Alma's hand. Didn't break, just rolled across the counter. We're running tests, but it appears to be complications from his spinal injury. He's stable now, moved to ICU for observation. But he's asking for James. Alma's hands gripped the counter. Is he... How serious is this? We won't know until we get the scans back. But Ms. Farquhar, he was quite insistent. He wants to see your son. She wasn't Roberto's emergency contact. Had never agreed to be. But James was listed in his file as his son now. That's how they'd found her. I'll be there as soon as I can. Alma hung up, grabbed her coat, told her manager she had a family emergency. Drove home faster than she should have, her mind racing through worst-case scenarios she'd spent 4 months not thinking about. At home, James was upstairs doing homework, sprawled on his bed with his math textbook and a bag of pretzels. Alma stood in his doorway, trying to figure out how to say this. James looked up, saw her face, sat up immediately. What's wrong? She sat on the edge of his bed. Roberto's in the hospital. He collapsed during physical therapy. James's eyes went wide. Is he okay? They think so, but he's asking for you. James closed his laptop, already reaching for his shoes. Can we go? Alma caught his hand. We don't have to. James, this could be scary. ICU. Machines. He might look bad. I know. James tied his first shoe. But I want to go. Are you sure? James looked at her with those gray-blue eyes that belonged to both of them. Mom, he asked for me. I should be there. That's when Alma realized her 9-year-old son was braver than she'd ever been. The drive to Kessler took 35 minutes. James was quiet, staring out the window, fingers drumming against his leg in the nervous pattern he'd had since he was 5. The ICU was on the 4th floor. Sterile, white hallways. That hospital smell. Antiseptic trying to cover sickness. Fluorescent lights that made everyone look half dead already. Dr. Martinez met them outside Roberto's room. He's awake. Vitals are stable. We're waiting on some test results, but I think he'll be okay. She looked at James. He's been asking for you every 15 minutes. James nodded solemnly. The room was small. Machines beeped rhythmically. An IV stand dripped clear fluid into Roberto's arm. He lay in the hospital bed, smaller than Alma. Had ever seen him? Oxygen tubes in his nose, monitors tracking every heartbeat. His eyes were closed. Then James stepped closer, and Roberto's eyes opened. Relief flooded his face. Instant, overwhelming relief. Hey, buddy, Roberto said. His voice was weak, scratchier than usual. James pulled a chair close to the bed, sat down. Are you okay? Roberto tried to smile. Failed. The effort seemed to cost him something. I've been better. He paused, breathing carefully. I'm sorry you have to see me like this. "It's okay," James said quietly. Roberto's hand trembled on top of the white sheets. James noticed. He always noticed. "James, I need to tell you something," Roberto said. "In case?" He trailed off. "In case what?" James asked. "In case I don't get another chance." The words hung in the room, heavy with all the mortality neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Roberto's eyes filled with tears. He didn't try to hide them, didn't look away, just let them fall while he spoke. "I wasn't there when you needed me. When your mom was pregnant, when you were born, when you took your first steps. I missed everything." His voice cracked, and I can make excuses. I can say I didn't know. But the truth is, I built a life where I didn't have to know, where work mattered more than people. The machines beeped, the IV dripped, time stretched. "You deserved a father who showed up," Roberto continued. "And I'm sorry I wasn't that, but I'm here now, and I will be, even if all I can do is watch from this bed." James sat very still, processing, thinking, being careful with his words the way he always was. Then he reached out and took Roberto's hand, the one that trembled. Roberto's fingers closed around his son's smaller, steadier hand. "My mom says people can change if they want to," James said. "Do you want to?" "More than anything." James nodded slowly. "Then that's enough." Roberto's face crumpled. Not from pain, from something deeper, from being seen by a 9-year-old who'd chosen grace over anger. "Thank you," Roberto whispered. Alma watched from the doorway, silent, tears streaming down her face. Not for Roberto, for James, for the man her son was becoming. She'd raised him to be kind without being naive, strong without being cruel, to see suffering and respond with compassion, but maintain boundaries. And watching him forgive someone who didn't deserve it, watching him choose connection over resentment, that was the proudest she'd ever been. They stayed for an hour. James told Roberto about school, about the science project he was working on, about the book he was reading. Normal things, life things. The kind of conversation that mattered more than grand declarations. Roberto listened like every word was precious. When the nurses came to run more tests, Alma and James left. In the elevator, James leaned against her side. "He was really scared," James said. "I know. I'm glad we came." "Me too." Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's not excusing. It's not forgetting. It's choosing not to carry the weight anymore. And if you've ever struggled with that, if you're watching this wondering if you're allowed to let go, comment below. Tell me your story. Because we're building something here. A place where complicated truths are allowed. Where grace and boundaries can coexist. You don't have to forgive anyone. But you're allowed to. And that's powerful. 2 weeks later, Roberto was discharged. The collapse had been a warning, his body telling him to slow down, to be more careful. But he'd recovered. Slowly. Steadily. James visited twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. Alma supervised at first, sitting on a nearby bench while they talked. But gradually, she learned to give them space. Sometimes she stayed. Sometimes she left them alone in the garden for 30 minutes while she grabbed coffee. Trust built slowly, like everything worth having. Roberto never pushed, never asked for more than James was willing to give. Never complained when Alma set boundaries. He showed up. That was enough. James started bringing his homework sometimes. Would sit at a picnic table in the garden, doing math problems while Roberto watched, occasionally helping when James got stuck. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Peace settled over them like coastal fog. Gentle, unexpected, almost comfortable. Alma started to believe maybe this could work. Maybe the hard part was over. Then, on a Saturday morning in October, Alma's phone rang. Roberto's lawyer. "Ms. Farquhar, I need to inform you that Antonia Farquhar has filed a lawsuit. She's claiming parental rights to James and demanding financial compensation for emotional distress. The world tilted. Because 6 months later, Antonia had resurfaced, and she wanted everything. Antonia Farquhar arrived with lawyers, a smile, and a demand for $3 million. The courier delivered the lawsuit on a Thursday afternoon. Thick envelope, official seal. The kind of legal document designed to intimidate before you even opened it. Alma read it standing in her kitchen, and with each page, her blood ran colder. Antonia was suing for emotional distress, for defamation, and, most audaciously, for parental rights to James. She claimed that as Alma's sister, and Roberto's former partner, she had familial standing, that she'd been unjustly excluded from James's life, that Roberto and Alma had conspired to deny her relationship with her nephew. It was absurd. It was legal warfare. It was Antonia. Alma read the document once, then picked up her phone and called Roberto. "She's coming for James," Alma said without preamble. Roberto's voice went hard. "Over my dead body. She's filed a lawsuit. Parental rights. $3 million in damages." Silence on the other end. Then, "Send me the documents. I'm calling my lawyers. Now." Within 48 hours, they had a legal team. Within a week, they were in depositions. Within a month, they were standing in family court fighting for the right to protect a child from a woman who'd never met him. The media caught wind of it. Local news first, then regional. Billionaire's secret son at center of custody battle. Sister versus sister. Family drama in tech CEO's past. Cameras followed them to the courthouse. Reporters shouted questions. Alma kept her head down, one hand on James's shoulder, shielding him from the chaos. Inside, Antonia played her role perfectly. She wore white to court. Soft, expensive white that made her look innocent, victimized. Spoke softly when questioned. Cried on cue. Talked about being shut out of her family. Denied the chance to know her nephew. Punished for mistakes made in her youth. She was a professional. And she was convincing. During the first recess, Alma escaped to the courthouse bathroom. Needed a moment away from the cameras, the lawyers, the performance happening in that courtroom. She was washing her hands when the door opened behind her. Antonia. They locked eyes in the mirror. "You always were the boring one, Alma," Antonia said, touching up her lipstick. "But you got the life I wanted." Alma turned around slowly. "I built a life. You just tried to steal one." Antonia smiled. That same smile from the hotel suite 10 years ago. Triumphant, cold, semantics. Is that what you call it? Stealing corporate secrets? Selling out your sister? Showing up a decade later demanding money and rights you never earned? I call it survival. Antonia capped her lipstick. You were always so naive, Alma. Love, family, loyalty. Those are weaknesses. No, Alma said quietly. They're what make us human. But you wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Antonia's smile faltered, just for a second. Then it was back, harder than before. I'm going to win this, she said. No, you're not. When they returned to the courtroom, it was Roberto's turn to testify. They brought him in through a side entrance, wheelchair access, away from the cameras. He'd dressed carefully, suit and tie. The tremor in his hands was worse today, stress exacerbating the nerve damage. Antonia's lawyer went after him immediately. Mr. Hotelling, why should the court believe you're fit to have parental involvement with this child? The lawyer's voice was sharp, designed to cut. Roberto looked at the judge, then at the lawyer. His hands gripped his wheelchair armrests, steadying himself. I'm not fit, he said simply. The courtroom went silent. I lost my legs. I lost a decade. I lost almost everything. Roberto's voice was calm, measured. I wasn't there when James was born. Wasn't there for his first steps, or first words, or first day of school. I have no defense for that except ignorance, and ignorance isn't innocence." He paused, making sure every word landed. "But I won't lose my son. Not to her. Not to anyone." Then Roberto nodded to his lawyer, who presented the evidence. Kendra's documents. Every email Antonia had sent to Orion Capital. Every wire transfer. Every piece of proprietary information she'd sold. The non-disclosure agreement. The $2 million payment. All of it. "This woman," Roberto said, gesturing toward Antonia, "didn't come here for family. She came here for money, just like she did 10 years ago." Antonia's lawyer objected. The judge allowed the evidence. Page by page, the truth came out. Not just about the espionage, but about Antonia's pattern. 3 previous lawsuits against former partners. 2 settled out of court. A history of using intimacy as leverage. She wasn't a victim. She was a predator. The judge reviewed the documents in silence. The courtroom waited. Even the reporters in the back gallery stopped rustling their notebooks. Finally, Judge Morrison looked up. Looked at Antonia. "Ms. Farquhar, this court finds your claim without merit." Antonia's face went white. "Furthermore, given the evidence of fraud and extortion presented here today, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation." The gavel came down. Case dismissed. Antonia sat frozen in her chair. Her lawyers whispered urgently. Then bailiffs approached, and she was escorted out of the courtroom. She didn't look back. Outside the courthouse, media swarmed. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions over each other. Alma stood with Roberto and James on the courthouse steps, their lawyer reading a prepared statement. James pressed close to Alma's side. Roberto's wheelchair positioned slightly behind them, protective. When the statement finished, they moved toward the car. Roberto stopped them with a quiet word. "Alma, thank you for fighting." She looked down at him, at this man who'd lost so much, who'd gained so little, who was trying anyway. "I wasn't fighting for you," she said. "I was fighting for him." Roberto glanced at James, then back at Alma. "I know. That's why I'm grateful." In the car, driving home through early evening traffic, James was quiet for a long time. Then, "Is she really gone?" Alma met his eyes in the rearview mirror. "Yes, she's really gone." "Good." That night, Alma received a text from Kendra. Antonia left the country. Monaco again. Heard through the grapevine she won't be coming back. Antonia disappeared. Again. For good this time. The legal battle was over, but the real work, building trust, building family, was just beginning. Because winning a court case didn't erase 10 years of absence, didn't automatically create connection, didn't solve the complicated equation of how 3 wounded people became something resembling whole, but it was a start. And sometimes, a start is all you get. 3 years later, James turned 12. And for the first time in his life, both his parents were at his birthday party. The backyard of Alma's small coastal house was filled with chaos in the best way. 12-year-old boys running around with water guns. The smell of burgers on the grill mixing with salt air from the ocean. A banner strung between 2 posts that read, "Happy Birthday, James," in letters he'd probably find embarrassing but wouldn't say so. Roberto sat in his wheelchair near the picnic table, talking to the parents of James's friends. He'd gotten better at this over the years. The small talk, the casual conversations, the ability to be comfortable in his limitations rather than fighting them. His hands still trembled when he held his lemonade, but he'd learned to use cups with handles. Small adaptations, daily victories. Alma watched from the kitchen window as she lit the candles on the chocolate cake, James's favorite, always chocolate. 12 candles. 12 years she'd raised him mostly alone. 3 years since Roberto had become part of their strange, reconstructed family. She carried the cake outside. Everyone gathered, sang off key. James stood at the head of the table, Roberto on one side, Alma on the other, looking equal parts embarrassed and pleased. He closed his eyes, made a wish, blew out all 12 candles in one breath. His friends cheered. Roberto's hand found James's shoulder, squeezed once. Alma caught her son's eye and smiled. This was what she'd fought for. The years between the courthouse and now had been filled with moments like this. Small, ordinary, precious. Roberto never missed another birthday, or school play, or parent-teacher conference. He showed up, sometimes tired, sometimes in pain. Always there. He taught James chess. Badly at first. His hands made it difficult to move the pieces precisely. But James was patient, and Roberto was determined. Eventually, they got better together. James taught Roberto how to laugh again. Real laughter. Not the polite kind from business dinners. The kind that came from terrible jokes and shared moments and the accumulation of inside references that families build over time. Alma and Roberto didn't rush anything romantic, didn't fall into each other's arms with declarations and promises. They rebuilt trust, like architects, slow, intentional, with blueprints and foundations and careful measurements. Some days were easy. Some days, Alma looked at Roberto and still saw the hotel suite. Still felt the betrayal, even knowing the full truth. Some days Roberto's guilt was so heavy he could barely speak. But they kept showing up. For James. And slowly, for each other. That evening, after the party ended, and the last parent picked up their exhausted child, the three of them walked down to the beach. James ran ahead to the water's edge, chasing waves like he used to when he was smaller. 12 years old, but still young enough to find joy in simple things. Alma and Roberto sat in the sand watching him. The sunset painted everything orange and gold. "I don't deserve this," Roberto said quietly. Alma didn't look at him, kept her eyes on James. "No, but James does." "What about you?" She turned then, really looked at him, at the gray in his hair that hadn't been there before, at the lines around his eyes, from pain and effort, at the man who'd lost everything and was trying to build something real from the wreckage. "I'm getting there," she said. Roberto nodded slowly. "I'll wait." "I know you will. That's the difference now." They sat in comfortable silence, not romantic, not distant, just present. Two people who'd hurt each other, learning how to sit beside that hurt without letting it define them. That night, after Roberto had gone back to his apartment in town, after James had showered off the cake and sunscreen, Alma tucked her son into bed, even though he insisted he was too old for tucking in. "Mom?" James said in the darkness. "Are you happy?" The question caught her off guard. "I am. Are you?" "Yeah." James pulled his blanket up to his chin. "I like having a dad, even if he came late." Alma kissed his forehead. "Me too." 6 years later, on James's 18th birthday, Roberto gave him a letter. They were at dinner, a nice restaurant, James's choice. He was heading to college in the fall, had grown into a young man who looked like both his parents and acted like neither of them. His own person, strong, kind, wise beyond his years. Roberto handed him an envelope. "Read it later," he said, "when you're alone." That night, James opened it. "Dear James, I wasn't there when you needed me, but you were there when I needed you. You taught me that love isn't about deserving. It's about showing up, even when it's hard, even when you're scared, even when you're broken. You could have rejected me. You had every right. Instead, you chose to give me a chance I hadn't earned. Thank you for letting me be your father. Not because I earned it, but because you chose grace. I'm proud of the man you've become. Your mother raised you well, better than I ever could have. But I'm grateful I got to witness it, to be part of it, even from the margins. Whatever you do, wherever you go, know this. You made a broken man feel whole again. Love. Dad James read it twice, then folded it carefully and put it in the box where he kept important things. 1 year after that, on a summer evening much like the one from James's 12th birthday, Alma and Roberto and James walked the beach together. James was home from college for the weekend. 19 now, taller than both of them, but still their son. He ran ahead, splashing in the water, pretending to be annoyed when they called him back, but grinning anyway. Roberto watched him from his wheelchair positioned on the firm sand. I never thought I'd get this. Alma sat beside him on a piece of driftwood. Neither did I. The sun set. The waves rolled in. James came back, dripping and laughing, and they headed home together. This isn't a story about a billionaire redeemed by love, or a woman who forgave her betrayer. It's about a mother who chose dignity, a child who chose wisdom, and a man who learned, too late, that power means nothing if you can't stand beside the people you hurt. But late doesn't mean never. And broken doesn't mean finished. So here's my question for you. What would you have done? Would you have let him back in? Would you have protected your child from the risk? Would you have chosen grace or boundaries or both? I want to know. Because your story matters just as much as Alma's. Drop it in the comments. And if this story moved you, if it made you think or feel or question, subscribe. Because I'm going to keep telling stories about real people facing impossible choices. Stories where the answers aren't easy. Where love and pain can exist in the same breath. Thank you for being here, for listening, for letting these characters into your heart. I'll see you in the next one. Some stories don't end. They just continue. Messy, beautiful, human.